very good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to it. Of course, it is another edition of the Stellenbosch Leadership Institute, Business Institute LeaderSHIFT conversation. Really 45-minute high-impact conversations where we get to navigate the world of uncertainty, the world of business, the world of servanthood, the world of public service, within a very contentious time and uncertain territory as we try to understand the global phenomena and also being able to act local whilst thinking global. My name, of course, is Faith Mangope, and as always, it is a pleasure and an honor to be able to be your facilitator for this morning, afternoon, and evening's conversation, depending where you are in the part of the world that you are actually joining us. As I said, it's 45-minute high-impact conversations with some of our global leaders, both within the private as well as the public sector, highlighting the importance of us being able to exercise those practical mechanisms of leadership and ways of being able to lead in an effective manner. Of course, as we are with the Stellenbosch Business Institute, what we do is become intentional about the change that we implement through being a catalyst for change in being able to implement these executive learning programs. So these are executive learning programs customized to ensure that leaders are ready for the next generation as well as a new generation of leadership. And so for this 45-minute series, I'll be taking you through one such a conversation with a global leader who I'll be announcing in just a few moments. And of course, it is that 45-minute high-impact conversation where you get to be a part of it. That means that you get to ask questions, you get to make commentary by simply utilizing our chat box. I will make sure that we read those chat boxes and also just keep it flowing, and we'll keep it engaging for this series. It is 45 minutes, it's high impact. Be sure to catch up with the conversation, but more importantly, please won't you just plug in with us. We do see that we're admitting more and more people and more of our delegates into the room. So hello everybody who's joining in from whichever part of the world that you're joining. We look forward to hosting you within this 45 minutes together. And it is a very safe space where we get to really conversate and we get to share ideas as leaders. We get to also just be human with one another, because I think sometimes leaders forget humanity and they forget that they're also human. So as we're engaging within these high-level conversations, do not forget to be human and let your humanity shine, because ultimately the best way that you're going to be effective in the space of leadership is by being able to be effective within your space. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome our guest for this afternoon, this morning's proceedings. His name is Adam Kingl. He's an author, renowned speaker, global leader. Of course, he's titled Sparking Success, Why Every Leader needs to develop a creative mindset. And of course, he's also the author of Next Generation Leadership, somebody who has got stories to tell. I'll tell you why in just a moment, because he has had quite insight and as well as interaction with somebody that I would deem not only a superstar, but somebody who's a big crush for many, many people. So I can't wait to tell you all about that. But won't you just welcome and help me welcome Adam Kingl, our speaker, our guest speaker for this afternoon, this morning's proceeding. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome from which part of the world? Tell us which part of the world are you joining us from?
Thanks for having me. I'm joining you from Richmond in the UK, in my home.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you, Adam. Now, as I said, you are a global speaker, you're a motivational speaker, you're an author, a global leader, both in business as well as in service. And of course, more than anything else, we're quite interested to get into the two books that you've actually authored, Sparking Success, Why Every Leader Needs to Develop a Creative Mindset, which we'll go into in a while. And of course, Next Generation Leadership, which will be a big part of the conversation for this afternoon. But before we talk about the nature of business, let's talk about you a little bit. Let's get to know you. Adam, talk a little bit to us about family. I mean, the beauty about it is that you're also quite apt within the creative space as well. So who is Adam Kingl? Talk to us a little bit about your family. Tell us about your dogs. Are they driving you as crazy as my dogs will be driving me crazy? What's going on in your world?
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. Well, your listeners are probably already confused because I said I'm joining you from the UK, and you probably are thinking, but that's not his accent. You're right. I'm originally from the US. I lived about the first half of my life in the States and the current half of my life in the UK. But I was born in Wisconsin, in the Midwest of the US, and raised mainly in Silicon Valley, California, before it was known as Silicon Valley. If you grew up in Silicon Valley in the 70s and early 80s, it was just the burbs. And you probably lived there if your parents worked in San Francisco, but you couldn't afford to live there. But my first career was in the creative arts. I worked in acting, mainly directing, and then worked on the business side in a number of different creative fields: theater, film, television, etc. After my bachelor's degree, I did a Master of Fine Arts at the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television, and continued working in that area, and just slowly gravitated over to the business side of the media and entertainment industry. After I did my MBA at London Business School, I then started more generalizing and applying some of the lessons I learned in working with creative companies, be it about adaptability, innovation, leadership, future of work, and started applying it to any industry and any function. And today I'm a faculty at a number of institutions around the world and do keynote speaking and writing.
We're definitely looking forward to some of the conversations that we're going to be embarking on. It should be very interesting. And please don't hold back, Adam. I think more than anything else, now is the time that we get into innovative, but also very authentic conversations about humanity within leadership. And we are very much in this dynamic, changing world of work. We've had this horrific time as a global community with the COVID-19 pandemic. Taking away some 2-3 years of our lives. A lot of us have lost loved ones. A lot of us have lost livelihoods and working, and more than anything else, a lot of the businesses have shut down. And the leaders that remain are leaders that need to contend now with a very different way of work and a very different world altogether. And that needs a certain type of leadership to be able to navigate this world, to have foresight, to be able to see within or ahead of the time, especially from where we come from. As you reflect on this 3 years that we've missed, since the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, and how the world has changed, what type of leader do you believe we need at this moment in time to navigate the next frontier of the economy, of social life, and maybe even of a better world that we can all live in?
Almost everyone I talk to in different industries, countries, etc., have shared similar themes in terms of what we expect, require, or need from our leaders. We need our leaders to be a hell of a lot more creative, adaptable, inspirational, and human. But all of these qualities we typically find are sort of greenwashed, for lack of a better verb. We talk about it as a value, but it often doesn't show up in action. We haven't habituated it. We haven't made it part of the DNA of our organizations. So I think that's the next obstacle that we need to overcome as organizations, and that starts with leaders. I think an organization has no hope to change unless its leaders are personally willing to change, because they are the bellwethers in the organization. They are the people from whom people take their cues in terms of mindsets and behaviors. So if we need to be more adaptable, and certainly COVID taught us that we definitely need to be more adaptable and empathetic, then we need to start practicing that and stop defaulting to management practices that are probably still, I would say, over a century old, despite the fact that we've had radical changes in technology, in society, in politics, etc. Management models have been pretty static. If you were a CEO in 1860, I think you could walk into a CEO suite anywhere in the world today and be pretty familiar and comfortable with what you're observing from that contemporary CEO. So I think we are due for some subtle and some radical transformations in what leadership might entail.
As you're speaking here about creativity, I want to just hone in a little bit on this theme of creativity. There's a saying that goes that adults, unfortunately, are probably way less happier than children. We laugh less than children, but we also have taken away the creative side of our brain and have put it in this cupboard. Because for some odd reason, we've been taught that when you're an adult, you have to deal within the realm of reality and not necessarily the realm of creativity. And from what I'm understanding, creativity is an integral part of effective leadership. But for those of us that have left creativity in the cupboard, that we've locked it up, because we're grown-ups now, we're leaders now, we can't be creative. How then do we start bringing in that theme of creativity, even in the way that we manage and in the way that we run our businesses? Because some of us have not laughed in a very long time in the name of being adults.
Yeah, well, you're so right with the first part. We all are filled with creativity. As human beings, it is part and parcel of being human. And yet we think that somehow adulting means you can't be creative, or being a professional means you can't be creative. And yet at the same time, we say creativity and innovation are priorities. So these things are not aligned. If I could just detour for a second, I just wanted to share, I think, an astounding pair of statistics. And this only happened a few years ago. One was a study from BCG, which asked CEOs of the 200 top global companies around the world, what are your top priorities? 79% said creativity and innovation were top 3 priorities. At roughly the same time, McKinsey did a survey asking just the rank and file of organizations and top global companies, how good is your organization at creativity and innovation? And 94% said, we're terrible at it. we're crap. I'm not sure there's a bigger gap between an aspiration and a reality in corporate life today than creativity and innovation. We say it's important, but we either actually are unwilling to do anything about it, or we find ourselves incapable. But to answer now your question directly, I think there's good news. Because we are all creative naturally, we can recover it. We can discover it anew. It's not, for example, a brand new skill or discipline, that you sort of have to unveil. But that requires us in some ways to go back to your sort of analogy of childhood, to go back to some of those qualities that we possessed in abundance as children. Curiosity, humility. I don't know, but I'm just going to plunge in, and give it a try. Not relying so much on expertise. Not only as leaders do we think we can't be creative, as leaders, we more and more rely on experts. I am the leader, so I have to know all the answers. I'm omniscient, omnipotent, and everything else you can add to that word. But actually, if we don't know what's around the corner, we probably need a heck of a lot more adaptability and a lot less relying on precedent and experience to give us the answers. The last time we had a global pandemic was over a century ago. So no leader with any wealth of experience, no matter how old you are, would have been prepared to use experience as a way to cope with COVID. When we had the Great Recession of 2007 and 9, even though we have regional and global recessions at about a decade, every decade cycle, we still seem incapable of it. It seems like it's a big surprise, and we don't know how to deal with it. So that plasticity, to be able to say yesterday's solutions are not necessarily the solutions for tomorrow, are super important. And creativity is, think of it like a muscle. You can exercise it. If you think it's withered, if you practice it, it gets easier. And you get even more creative and more left field solutions and higher quality solutions. But you have to build in time, practice that muscle, to exercise that muscle, and you have to keep yourself free from distraction when you are exercising that muscle. That's the other problem, is leaders were so busy all the time. So I was getting calls and emails and, oh, I know you're busy, you just have 5 minutes. Can you just help me answer this question? All those distractions keep us from being focused. It actually prevents our brain from getting up into creative states, which neuroscientists call gamma state, where the hertz, the wavelength of activity in our brains increases. Super focused, super creative. You can't be up there if all the time you're being forced back to the mundane, which actually brings you back to what neuroscientists call delta brainwaves. So creating time, holding that time sacrosanct, and just practicing having brainstorming meetings, creative conversations, even individually, giving yourself creative challenges enhances your ability to be creative in any walk of life, be it personal or in business.
Yeah, it certainly does need us to go back to the beginning and back to the basics. Just talk to us a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned from having to be in this very creative industry and having to work in theater and be a leader within that space and be a leader in the media fraternity. And somebody as a media practitioner myself, I can tell you the dynamics of working within a media space and also having to filter what is right, what is wrong, what is misinformation, what is actual information, what is fit for consumption, what is not fit for consumption, what is in the interest of people, what is not in the interest of people. What have been some of those learnings? Because I believe the sectors of industries, though we are unique in what we offer, but we are the same in terms of our objective. An objective at the end of the day is to try to create a world where we're all interconnected. Just some of your insights as well from working within those spaces.
Yeah, well, when I was researching my new book, Sparking Success, I was trying to think about, well, where and how do we find great paragons, role models of creativity and innovation and adaptability? And given my background, the first place I naturally gravitated to were the arts, entertainment, and media. And when you look at those places, sure, we're dealing with a lot of the same business challenges and whatnot, but we also know is that some of the micro habits that those leaders practice are actually different from what I observe in leaders in so-called traditional industries. The way in which they lead meetings, the way in which those leaders have conversations with their peers or the direct reports, the way in which they incentivize new ideas is actually different. But the good news is there's nothing in those micro habits that is necessarily has to reside solely in the creative field. So we have artificially ghettoized those activities and to say, well, because that happens in theater or in media or whatnot, or in painting or in jazz, you couldn't possibly do it in a boardroom in another industry. But actually, these are just human habits. So I extrapolated the behaviors and then looked at how you might use that in any industry. And just so that the reader wouldn't be completely discouraged that there's no hope to apply those habits, I found traditional industries who are or leaders in traditional industries who are using those habits. So it goes back to this idea of practicing, and sometimes the good news is these are little things. How you start a conversation, how you encourage the next idea, how you get someone off of one idea if they're stuck and encourage them to do it. These are universal habits, actually, but we just aren't very good at practicing them because for too long they haven't existed in corporate lists of so-called key leadership competencies for their people.
And to labor a little bit on that one, it's also about re-engineering our hardwiring. And many of us are hardwired to believe in and not taking away from business school, but we're hardwired to believe what business school says and how we ought to behave in that sphere. And for many of us that are listening to this conversation, Adam, saying, you know what, you're absolutely correct. We need to be able to relook and be more creative in the ways that we lead so that we can indeed be effective leaders within this, changing dynamic world of work. But if we had to ask you right down to the how do we do it? How do we re-engineer what we've been taught for so many years? How do we get rid of our hardwiring so that we can start having effective practices that are creative, that are aware and awakened to this new line of work, to this generational mix, to the youth that have just entered into the workforce who require a different kind of leadership if you're going to retain them? How do we answer the how question?
Yeah, well, there isn't one answer, right? Because each of these micro habits that I've discussed are suitable for different conversations in different contexts. But the good news is there's a whole toolkit of different things that you can use. So one very quick one, for example, is if leaders or teams or organizations tell me that they struggle with getting great new ideas. We always just seem to rehash the same handful of ideas over and over again. That brings me to a couple of micro habits that I observed from, paragons in creative fields. One lesson, one very minor, mindset shift is creativity is often a numbers game. In other words, this idea that you get this creative idea striking you upside the head, like a lightning bolt from Zeus's hand himself, is usually mythical. Generally, when I look at how great ideas came about in creative organizations, they brainstormed unashamedly and objectively and identified 100 possible ideas and then worked on them and iterated and workshopped those ideas until one idea emerged as an exponential supernova idea. But they didn't realize that it was at the time. And because of that, in traditional business, what we generally do, even when that great idea hits us, because we haven't workshopped it, iterated it, and been objective about it to judge it and consider it over time, we just go, oh, that's not good enough. That's not a supernova idea. And we immediately dismiss it out of hand. rather than thinking, you know what, I probably have to think more like a creative person, more like a venture capitalist, to be honest with you, right? Who knows that they have to invest in 100 ideas to find one or two great ones. So let's take any and every idea and give it a little bit of airtime and just explore it and let it breathe. So that's one. The second, again, very micro habit is related to the first one, which is don't judge ideas at the same time that you're proposing them. So the ideation process and the evaluation process must be separated in time and even in space. But too often as leaders, we assume our role in a room is to assess an idea as soon as we hear it. You say an idea, okay, this is why that idea will or won't work. Actually, you should shut up and just say, okay, great, let's put that on the wall. We'll come back to it. What's the next idea? Oh, great, that's another great idea. Let's write it down. We'll come back to it. Get as many ideas as possible. Because if you say no to every idea that's proposed because you think that's your job, do not lament to me in 6 months' time that no one ever proposes any more ideas to you. You're the reason why, because you've killed everyone's ego, stomped on their very soul by discouraging any suggestion of novelty. So what remains then for the organization that wants to consider new ideas, who have such leaders? Tiny incremental ideas, right? Let's just take an idea that we already know is profitable, our best-selling product, and we'll just do a little tweak. And then, aha, it's an innovation. And now we've added 0.001% to our margin. Aha, look how creative we are. That isn't creativity. That's just regular process improvement. So but this again comes back to the leader's behaviors, and that creates the wider environment in which creativity either thrives or dies on the vine.
Yeah. Adam, so what I'm going to do throughout the course of our conversation as well, just to try to get as much interaction as possible, and also just to give our delegates an opportunity to ask you some of those pertinent questions, I'm going to constantly refer to some of the questions, some of the content, the comments that have been shared by our delegates, and then you and I will flow from there. We'll answer some of these questions as you and I navigate this conversation. I don't want to leave anybody out of this discussion, as always, so thank you so much. Please do keep sending us some of your questions or your comments so that Adam and myself are able then to facilitate it for you, and you can get some of those questions answered. So for example, I've got R. Fredericks. Hello, R. Fredericks, saying, how can leadership get more creative in avoiding retrenchment as best as possible in these economically challenging times companies are currently facing? So how is it that we can be more creative in avoiding retrenchment? I love it. This is another practical way of being able to exercise the how part.
Yeah. Well, having a few gray hairs reminds me, I've been through a few recessions in my lifetime. And I know that those organizations that have successfully bounced back or even thrived during recessions have been those who constantly innovated and found opportunities in volatile times or tougher times, rather than as the question says, let's retrench. Let's just stick to our knitting. Let's do as little as possible. So you know that at the end of a difficult economic period, you are going to be worse off. All you're trying to do is cut your losses instead of saying, how do we get better at the end of this? How do we grow through this? How do we become, the #1 market leader at the end of this, instead of, well, let's just, at the moment, it looks, I think we're going to lose 30% of our top line. Let's try to make it 25. Well, that isn't really creative thinking, right? All you're trying to do is cut your losses. But that's human psychology. For any of you who have ever been, gambling, we know that once we start losing, we start betting just to try to make up our losses, because we hate to lose. So it just becomes about trying to save the loss, make up the loss, instead of where's the opportunity here. So in business, those organizations that are really creative in tough times thrive. So a great example is one of the organizations that I looked at in sparking success from the creative field is Carnegie Hall in New York City. And that's an interesting case study because Carnegie Hall's leader is both the managing and creative director. He has both roles, the business leader and the creative leader. That's very rare. And he said that one of the ways in which Carnegie Hall came out better with a higher subscription and more more people who are buying and subscribing to their services, be them virtual or in person in New York City, was they immediately pivoted to virtual during COVID lockdown. They immediately said, actually, this is a great opportunity because, most people in their lives won't be able to go to New York. But if the world is forced into virtual, this makes Carnegie Hall open and available to the world. And maybe at the end of this, we don't just go back to in-person performances, but we retain all those people who are now consuming our performing arts virtually and hold on to them. And yes, maybe a few of them will make the pilgrimage to New York and see a show at Carnegie Hall, but let's actually rethink what we do and how we do it. So they came out stronger rather than weaker at the end of this. You could easily have looked at it and said, this is an existential threat. Let's just shut all operations down and minimize our variable costs. And hopefully when this is all over, we'll still be around. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but that's how most companies deal with crises, which is a really sad state of affairs when you think about it. And again, why should we lament that we aren't adaptable, that we aren't creative? We have completely the wrong approach. But whereas we know that the innovators in business aren't just the people who innovate when times are great. The true innovators in any industry are those who actually double down on their innovation when times are tough.
Yeah. A lot of times, especially when it comes to more traditional corporate spaces, the adaptable side or the adaptable component is something that is desired, but is something that is hardly ever implementable. Yeah. They often say the big ship turns the rudder quite slowly, that it moves quite slowly. It takes a longer time as opposed to a smaller or medium enterprise from being able to be adaptable. Then how then do we start practically manifesting it, especially when it comes to the larger corporates? Because I find that with them, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's the red tape, there's the traditional way of doing things, it's worked for 50 years, so why do you want to change something that has worked for 50 years? And the world has changed, but some of these companies, these major corporations are struggling to adapt to this change simply because this big ship turns the rudder quite slowly. So how then do we start getting practical from that front? The small businesses can do so. The pivoting is very hard when you're a larger corporation.
Yeah, well, we talked about one area. If you want to change the environment, the culture, that starts with leadership behaviors. But there's another piece that you referred to, and you used the B word, bureaucracy, and you're absolutely right. That's a huge structural reason why organizations find it very difficult to adapt. And it is common parlance to say when an organization gets bigger, it creates more bureaucracy. But I want to pose a creative provocation. It doesn't have to be so. An organization might need more systems to manage its size, but it doesn't necessarily need more bureaucracy. The difference between system and bureaucracy, system is you know what it's for. Bureaucracy is if it's yet another decision point, another approval, exponentially harder to get something done because we're bigger, that's just bureaucracy. So sometimes organizations get in their way and they use their size as an excuse why they can't be adaptable and innovative. One of the largest companies in the white goods industry on this planet is Haier, the Chinese white goods company. They produce washer dryers, air purifiers, etc. They're a huge company, tens of thousands of employees. They have almost no bureaucracy. Every business line is a small entrepreneurial team that manages that. Because their CEO said, we need to kill bureaucracy or we will not be able to adapt, or we will not be able to innovate. We have to give power back to people who are on the front lines, who see what's happening with their customers and with their products every day. I would say, so if you're saying, okay, fine and good, Adam, but how do I know? What's the test so I would know if we're being better about cutting bureaucracy and allowing creativity to thrive from an organizational design perspective, beyond the cultural behavioral perspective? I would say three things. One is how many people have to approve someone doing something new? Fewer the better, right? Two, how easy is it for any employee to get just a little bit of resource, a little bit of money, not million, a little bit of money, or a little bit of a colleague's help or whatnot to try something new, prototype, experiment, etc. That's the other. Third is every manager in your company anyone who's responsible for other people as a line manager, do they personally have as one of their objectives to enable innovation and creativity in the organization? Because until managers, leaders are personally incentivized to make it happen, then whenever you go to them asking for an adaptation, an innovation, etc., you're simply relying on their patience and their empathy. But if you are someone out there saying, yeah, but Adam, well, only what gets measured gets done, fine, let's measure it then. Let's simply make it an objective. It's not that hard. Organizations as large bureaucratic institutions are very good about instituting objectives and policies. So actually, we can use bureaucracy against bureaucracy itself.
Very smart answer that you're giving there. I want to get to some of the comments, and please keep them coming. I do see them, and I'm going to try to get through them as quick as possible. Belinda Knight asks the questions. Companies don't allow the time for ideation and thinking. The world has moved to getting the task done, no?
Yeah, but actually, I think while the world has moved to that, I think the world moved to that a long time ago. And so we think it's just part of the weft and warp of corporate fabric. It's always been so. Hasn't always been so. Actually, organizations pre-industrial revolution often were much smaller, much more agile. So while that's true, there's no reason why we can't change and adapt. And some of the most innovative organizations, all those companies that wind up on the top 10, top 20 most innovative companies in the world, they are doing something about it. They're addressing the point that, to my point around CEO's priorities, if it's a priority, then you have to make it happen. You can't just say it and somehow assume that through divine providence, it will be manifest because it came out of your mouth as a leader.
Just around foresight. Leaders who are going to navigate this world need a good amount of foresight and a good amount of confidence in the ability to weather certain storms that come about as a result of this changing dynamic world of work. How then do we practically exercise foresight? Because sometimes leaders get bogged down into the operations of the business. We're just trying to survive. We're just trying to make it. We're just trying to keep everybody employed. That there is no time to think ahead. There is no time to practice foresight. How then do we strike that balance in meeting the needs of now, focusing on operations, bogging down when we need to, but also have an element of foresight so that we know exactly what lies ahead?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two competencies that you've addressed there. If I could paraphrase, one is foresight and one is adaptability, right? So being able to see the tsunami coming before it smacks you in the face, and then having the adaptability to be able to run away or confront it or deal with it and survive when it does come. So we talked quite a bit about adaptability so far, but let's talk about foresight. So we certainly know that the world is changing faster than it ever has before. And also I think the number of things all changing at once is new. So I was doing a lot of work with Nestle a few years ago, and that CEO at that time said, when I first started in business, if we said, yes, leaders need to see over the horizon, that's fine, because while you're dealing with the day-to-day, things are moving around you. And he said it was sort of like being on a swing. And when you're being on the swing, you can look out, you can see over the horizon, and it's easy to keep your eye on the horizon. He said, now, with all the things that are happening, in the organization and with your competitors, while also trying to keep your eye on the horizon, it's not like being on a swing, it's like being on a roller coaster. You can't keep your eye on the horizon because things are moving around all the time. So it's harder to know what's going to come. Very few people were able to predict until like a month or so before it happened that we were going to be entering a global pandemic. So the adaptability becomes ever more important. Now, I'm not saying that to discredit the need for foresight, but we also have to acknowledge that it's harder to know what some of those big tsunamis are. However, the biggest ones, generally you do see them coming. So for example, let's talk about video streaming, right? That's been a hugely disruptive technology. And Netflix is one of the primary beneficiaries of that huge digital trend, right? Because they were able to pivot their business model from having a mail service of DVDs to streaming video. You might think, yeah, well, they were able to look over the horizon. They could see when no one else could that video streaming was coming. That's nonsense. The American telephone giant AT&T, they publicly forecast that live video streaming was going to be possible and viable in households by about the early 2000s. And they made that prediction in the 1980s. So companies had 20 years to prepare for this. But because, as you said, they were so consumed with the day-to-day, they didn't pay attention to what was actually right in front of their face as a trend that is not only visible, but growing day by day. And that brings me to the other point, and you've referred to this, and it's so right. Leaders get bogged down in the day-to-day. If I'm a leader in a company of 10,000 people, that probably means there are 9,900 people who are focused on the day-to-day. I should not be one of those people. My job is to make my organization more relevant tomorrow than it is today. And that is not doing operational day-to-day activities. But as leaders, too often we assume my job as a leader is to do what I was doing in my last job, but longer and harder. Because I was good at that, if I'm promoted, my job is to do the previous job, but be the best person at that job. Now I've been recognized. Like I was a customer relations manager, and now I'm a marketing division manager. But actually, it's still the same job. I'm a customer relations manager, but I just do it longer and harder and with bigger clients. No, your job is changing. The job of leadership is different. So one of your comments, I think, in the chat said leadership is a practice. It's a different muscle. It's not using the previous muscles. You have plenty of people who are focused on the day-to-day. And that's a big problem, not only in terms of looking over the horizon, but even in terms of being customer-centric. A lot of senior executives are making decisions based on what they think their customers want. But that could be based on assumptions of when they were customer-facing 20 years ago. And they still assume that insight about their customers is valid today. Let your marketing people, let your customer relations people tell you what your customers need today. That is no longer your job. Your job is to take the information that your people are gathering and then decide, okay, strategically in our business model and in our management model and in our cultural model, how do we make ourselves more relevant for those customers tomorrow than we are today?
Sure. I've got another question from Aki saying, hi, if there's time, would love to hear Adam's take on value innovation and blue ocean strategy, and also on the concept of jobs to be done.
I'm not sure what we mean when she says in her context jobs to be done, but certainly in terms of strategy, a lot of organizations I think out there would say, yeah, blue ocean strategy, fine, but where's the blue ocean, right? I'm working in an industry that's been around for 200 years. What blue ocean? Okay, but you can always continually look at your business model, and that's just answering three fundamental questions: who is your customer? What are you offering them, and how are you offering it? So, actually sometimes just adjusting your assumptions around one of those questions can create value through strategic innovation. So we don't always have to look for the ocean at the end of the lane, to quote a Neil Gaiman play. Sometimes you have to say, look, I'm still making assumptions that are no longer valid or that most of my competitors assume to be true, but I'm starting to realize is not true anymore. And then I can start to carve out, new space that my competitors are in, like enterprise, right? You said, well, what are we offering? Okay, rental cars. We're offering rental cars. How are we offering it? Well, maybe it's not in airports. Okay, well, if it's not in airports, you always rent a car in an airport. Where else would you rent a car? Well, what if we rented a car, to people whose cars have broken down? Oh, okay. So then we're going to create relationships with the maintenance garages and so forth. And that's how we're going to reach our customers. Just a little tweak in assumptions. When, where, why, how do people rent cars can carve out a new pie rather than, how do I just get a slightly bigger piece of the existing pie? It sometimes are these little subtle tweaks rather than wholesale, kind of fundamental changes, which from which you can still derive huge value.
We could literally listen to you or speak about this, Adam, all day, because you're making it so practical. And I think that's what's important, especially in nowadays world of work, and especially nowadays, navigation of leadership is the more practical, the better. That's the only way that we are going to become better. Now, speaking about better, a little birdie has whispered in my ear that you also got an opportunity to do the absolute impossible, pun intended there. And just talk to us a little bit about some of your learnings, especially when it comes to working with certain superstars, such as Tom Cruise, for example. I understand that you had a moment of working with Tom Cruise. And again, you've literally taken the impossible and made it possible in that space. So as we wrap up the conversation, how was it and how was that navigate? Because it's not only just about leading in the media space, it's leading personalities.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Well, I sort of, as I mentioned, I made this transition from the entertainment media space into the business side. But there was this interim period where I was specifically working on the business side of entertainment companies. But while I was doing that, I thought it was still useful and important for me to keep my hand in the pot, as it were, and understand like what is the product that we're creating and how are we creating it and could we be doing it better, et cetera. So I did things like voiceovers for radio. And I once played in a radio ad for Guinness, the beverage. I played a pig. I was not the lead pig, but I was an important pig in that radio ad. And in doing things like extra work, they're very cagey when you sign up to be an extra. They just say, show up at such and such a time, such and such a place, and then we'll take it from there. Often they use code words for the production, etc. Anyway, I found myself free in Los Angeles one evening, and I was signed up to this extra service, and I was assigned to be go to this production. There was an all-night production, and that's very common, right, for productions to run through the night, particularly if it's all night shoots, etc. And it sent me to this restaurant in Brentwood in Southern California, and only then did I learn that the movie was Jerry Maguire. Now, obviously, I didn't know about this movie or anything about that, and I said, okay, as I showed up, who's on this movie? Well, you're going to be in the scene with Tom Cruise and Eric Stoltz. And oh, okay, fine. Well, luckily, I had been to drama school, so that gave me some immunity to being starstruck. You have a job to do. You got to focus and do your job. And I was just an extra too, so I didn't have to memorize lines. But then they said, "Oh, you're in SAG, Screen Actors Guild, or you're eligible, so you'll be a featured extra." So that means as Tom Cruise and Eric Stoltz are doing the scene, if any of you are familiar with the film Jerry Maguire, it's the bachelor party scene. So they're having this scene, they're having the conversation. I'm literally standing like next to them, like listening to I'm in between them, listening to their conversation like that. Or I should say, and this is no disrespect to Tom Cruise, like Eric Stoltz, Tom Cruise, sort of listening to them like, Tom Cruise is quite a small, but very well-built gentleman, but he's a small gent. And I found all night, trying to hold attention, stay in character, and realize like this is a very surreal moment in your life, Adam, that you're probably not going to have again. And of course, if any of you have been on a movie set, it's a lot of sit around and wait. For every minute of filming, you're probably sitting around waiting for an hour. So we had lots of conversation. Honestly, I don't really remember what I talked about with Tom and Eric. It was just just keeping ourselves loose and relaxed, trying to stay awake, frankly, at like 4 a.m. Because of course, while it's a bachelor party, they're handing around beverages. Of course, they're non-alcoholic beverages. But every now and then people were saying, "Can I just have maybe some coffee in this fake beer?" While Eric Stoltz was smoking a cigar. He was starting to feel ill, right? Because even though it's only a 2-minute scene, you film it for 6 hours, you start to get sick smoking a cigar for that amount of time. So you kind of learn about the good, the bad, and the ugly about filmmaking, which was very useful and important for me in understanding the business of filmmaking.
It's absolutely beautiful, and I love the wealth of experience as well in navigating these different sectors of industry, because it helps us become adaptable human beings. As we bring the session to a close, Adam, advice that leaders, delegates can walk home with as they're about to go back into their spaces of leadership, back into their spaces of management. What can they walk away from this conversation with?
I guess I would go back to the first theme I mentioned. I think that leaders need a heck of a lot more curiosity, right? Remind ourselves of that childlike curiosity in order to help ourselves be more curious and playful and innovative. And that could be really simple things, very practical things. Like if you walk to work, take a different route to work every day. Be surprised by what you see. Take up a new hobby, like during lunch, just take up some sketching. That starts firing new neurons in your brain. And that alone starts to change you ever so subtly into a person who's more amenable to novelty. Your people will pick up on that. You don't even have to tell them what you're doing. your people will know that, because as a leader, you are the most visible person in the organization. As the bellwether, people will automatically become more open to innovation or open to adaptability as a result.
Much appreciated. Adam, as I said, we can have this conversation throughout the whole day, but then we won't have an opportunity to actually practically lead. So we have to pause it there for this afternoon. And thank you so much for your insight. This is lovely. Sparking Success, why every leader needs to develop a creative mindset. And of course, you've got the other book as well, Next Generation Leadership. That's what we need to get a hold of there. Next Generation Leadership by Adam Kingl. You have to get a copy of that one as well. I think it's absolutely fabulous to have these kinds of leadership strategies, and much appreciated, as I said. And ladies and gentlemen, without keeping you here for too long, this is where we have to bring our conversation for this particular series to an end, of course, until we meet again. Our next meeting is on the 28th of June. You do not want to miss it, because John Davis will be joining us for the conversation. Really renowned speaker as well, somebody who's insightful, especially when it comes to the world of work and the world of leadership. So I have absolute surety that we're going to walk up with some true nuggets out of that conversation on the 28th of June. Please make sure that you diarize it. Continue the conversations of leadership going, but more importantly, the conversations around shifting leadership dynamics, and of course, having the foresight to navigate very much uncertain times. Until we meet again for this leadership series or LeaderSHIFT series, thank you so much for joining us as the Stellenbosch Business Institute. Until we meet again, have a fantastic day, rest of your day, until we do it again. Bye-bye.